It's a universal truth that one man's junk is another man's treasure. But sitting here, on an overturned pickle bucket in the center of my garage, I was beginning to suspect that my junk was just junk. It wasn't even interesting junk. It was the beige, vaguely disappointing junk of a life lived squarely in the middle lane. I surveyed my kingdom. To my left, a stack of National Geographics from the 90s, their iconic yellow spines bleached pale by a decade of sunlight sneaking through a grimy window. To my right, a Nordic track machine from the era when spandex was considered high fashion, now serving as a very expensive coat rack. And straight ahead, the crown jewel. A box labeled MISC cords, a tangled nest of electronic serpents, none of which, I was sure, connected to anything still in my possession. This was my life now. Frank Miller, former senior logistics coordinator for a company that sold paper products to other companies that sold paper products. I hadn't been fired, you see. I was a victim of corporate restructuring, a phrase so devoid of humanity it could only have been invented by a committee in human resources. They gave me a decent severance package and a firm handshake, and for the first week, it felt like freedom. I was going to be a consultant. I was going to write a novel. I was going to finally learn how to brew my own beer. 2 months later, my consulting firm consisted of a single, unanswered email, my novel had a title and nothing else, and my beer brewing attempt had resulted in a sticky explosion in the pantry that Linda, my infinitely more sensible wife, was still complaining about. My days were a long, slow march of alphabetizing the spice rack. Allspice now comes before basil, as God intended, and watching daytime television, an experience that can make a man question all his life choices. The real problem, the one that hummed with a low-grade anxiety beneath the surface of my newfound boredom, was the credit card bill pinned to the fridge. It was mocking me. "We should declutter," Linda said one Saturday morning, sipping her coffee and eyeing the bill as if it were a venomous snake. "Just clear some of this stuff out. It would feel good to have some space." For her, it was a simple, practical solution, a chore. But for me, the clouds parted. A celestial choir began to sing. A light bulb didn't just go on. It went supernova. "Linda," I said, my voice filled with the gravity of a man who had just solved cold fusion. "You're a genius." She blinked. "For wanting to clean the garage?" "No, not clean, monetize. We're not just going to throw it out. We're going to have a yard sale." The words tasted like victory. A yard sale. It wasn't about cleaning, it was about commerce. It was capitalism in its purest form, a return to the free market after being exiled from my corporate temple. It was a battle of wits, a dance of negotiation, all conducted on the sacred asphalt of my own driveway. I spent the next week in a whirlwind of preparation that Linda referred to as my descent into madness. I didn't just put price stickers on things. I curated. I crafted narratives. A slightly chipped garden gnome wasn't 50 cents. It was Norman, a stoic garden sentinel with a mysterious past. $2. The Nordic track became a vintage low-impact cardio sculpture. $50, or best offer. I created little handwritten cards with these descriptions, convinced that a good story could add at least $1 to the price of anything. I made a playlist on my phone titled Haggler's Delight. A truly chaotic mix of the Rolling Stones, the theme from The Price is Right, and a little bit of ABBA, because you can't be sad when you're listening to ABBA. I even set up a small card table with a sign that read, "Free advice, quality not guaranteed," next to a pot of lukewarm coffee. The day of the sale was glorious. The sun was shining. People came, they haggled. I sold a box of my old 8-tracks to a hipster who ironically called them pre-vinyl. A woman bought a fondue set that hadn't been used since the Carter administration. I gave a kid $1 off a stack of old comics because he correctly identified the original 4 members of the Fantastic Four. I was in my element. I was a titan of neighborhood industry, a suburban Warren Buffett. By 2 p.m., I had made $475 in crumpled bills that I kept in an old toolbox. I was high on the thrill of it all when she appeared. She moved with the silent, purposeful glide of a predator. Her name was Carol Perkins, president of the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association. She was a woman who seemed to have been born wearing a beige pantsuit, holding a clipboard. Her hair was a perfect, immovable helmet, and her expression suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice crisp and cool, cutting through the upbeat sounds of Dancing Queen. "Carol, welcome," I beamed, gesturing expansively at my wares. "Can I interest you in a lightly used bread maker? It'll change your life." She did not smile. "Our records indicate this is your second yard sale this quarter." Her eyes scanned my driveway, not with the interest of a customer, but with the cold scrutiny of a health inspector. "First, please, call me Frank," I said, leaning against the free advice table with what I hoped was a charming nonchalance. "And second, I wouldn't call this a mere yard sale. This is a curated outdoor exhibition of domestic artifacts. A pop-up experience, if you will. See, I even have scones." I pointed to a plate of slightly stale Entenmann's donuts. Carol's eyes narrowed. "The Northwood Estates Covenants, Bylaw 7, Section 3, are very clear. 1 yard sale per household per calendar year. You had one in April." I remembered I had sold an old lawnmower and made $80. "Ah, but that was a heavy machinery liquidation event. Totally different animal, you see. Semantics, Carol." She made a small, precise tick mark on a sheet of paper on her clipboard. "You'll be receiving a formal warning in the mail. Have a nice day." She turned and glided away, leaving a vacuum of joy in her wake. Linda had been watching from the doorway. "What was that about?" "Oh, just Carol being Carol," I said, waving a dismissive hand as I shoved a wad of cash into my pocket. "She was probably just jealous of my incredible deals." "Frank, you know how she is. Maybe you should pack it up." "Nonsense," I declared, feeling the triumphant weight of the money in my pocket. "It was a wildly successful one-time event. What's she gonna do?" I looked out at my driveway, at the last few customers browsing my glorious junk. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I was a provider, a merchant, a king, and no monarch in a beige pantsuit was going to dethrone me. The first shot in the war arrived 3 days later. It wasn't delivered by mail. That would have been too impersonal, too inefficient for the likes of Carol Perkins. No, this was an act of precision psychological warfare. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, sealed not with a lick, but with a pristine piece of Scotch tape, and affixed directly to the center of our front door at eye level. "What's this?" Linda asked, peeling it off carefully. "Maybe it's a fan letter," I said. "Admirers of my commercial prowess." The letterhead was embossed with the Northwood Estates logo, a single, perfect oak tree that looked judgmental even in silhouette. The subject line was in bold, unforgiving Times New Roman, "Official notice of covenant violation and subsequent fine." "Oh, here we go," I muttered. The letter, penned with all the warmth and charm of a parking ticket, cited Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph C, the unsanctioned repetitive vending of household goods. It went on to inform me that, as per my flagrant disregard for the prior verbal warning, a fine of $100 was being levied against our property, payable within 30 days to avoid further punitive measures. The final sentence was a masterclass in passive aggression. "We trust this resolves the matter, and we can all continue to enjoy the peace and aesthetic harmony of our community." It was signed, in a ruthlessly neat cursive, "Carol Perkins, HOA President." Linda sighed. Just pay it, Frank. It's not worth it. But it was worth it. This wasn't about $100. It was about the principle. This was tyranny. This was a woman with a clipboard and too much free time trying to crush the entrepreneurial spirit of the common man. Pay it? I scoffed, holding the letter as if it were a declaration of war. Linda, you don't pay bullies. You stand up to them. You fight them on the beaches. You fight them on the landing grounds. You fight them in the meticulously manicured cul-de-sacs. My speech was slightly undermined by the fact that I was still in my pajamas at 11 in the morning. Okay, Winston Churchill, she said, pouring herself another cup of coffee. What's your plan? Another pop-up experience? I need to know the enemy, I said, my eyes gleaming with a newfound purpose. I need to get inside their heads. My quest led me to the official Northwood Estates Homeowners Association covenant and bylaws, a 3-ring binder as thick as a phone book and twice as boring. Linda kept it on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, next to the warranty for a dishwasher we no longer owned. I spent the rest of the day on the couch with a yellow highlighter, poring over the document like a scholar studying ancient texts. It was a journey into the heart of suburban darkness. Linda, listen to this, I shouted from the living room. Bylaw 12, Section 2. All visible garbage receptacles must be of a uniform taupe or forest green coloration. Uniform taupe. Is this a neighborhood or a gulag? An hour later. Holy cow. Bylaw 19. No lawn statuary, including but not limited to gnomes, flamingos, or reflective gazing balls, shall exceed a height of 12 inches. They're legislating gnome height. This is madness. By dinner time, the book looked like a jaundiced zebra, and I was a man radicalized. This wasn't a set of community guidelines. It was a manifesto of micromanagement. I had to fight back. For Norman. For all the oppressed gnomes. My first call for reinforcements was to Dave. Dave lives 2 houses down and has been my best friend since we moved in. He's a man who owns a welding torch for hobby purposes and whose solution to a leaky faucet once involved something called industrial epoxy that permanently fused the handle to the sink. He was, in short, the perfect chaotic mind for this problem. He came over with a 6-pack, and I laid out the situation in my garage, the scene of my former glory. So the beige dictator shut you down, Dave said, cracking open a beer. Classic Carol. Last year she tried to find me because my basketball hoop's net wasn't regulation white. It's a matter of principle, Dave, I explained, pacing between the Nordic track and a box of old vinyl records. She can't just extinguish the flame of commerce. Dude, it's simple, he said, taking a long drink. You gotta use loopholes. She said no yard sales, right? So you don't call it a yard sale. You call it something else. I tried that. The curated exhibition thing bounced right off her. No, you gotta be smarter. He leaned in conspiratorially. Call it a charity drive. The charity is the Benevolent Fund for Frank's beer money. Totally legit. I don't think that's how charities work, Dave. Okay, how about this? An outdoor asset liquidation event. Sounds official, corporate even. She loves corporate. The idea had merit. The following Saturday, I set up my tables again. This time, I had a large, professionally printed sign from Kinko's that read, Miller Family Asset Liquidation. It looked official. It looked serious. It looked like something that would involve spreadsheets. I hadn't even sold a single mismatched coffee mug before Carol's silver Lexus glided to a silent stop at the end of my driveway. This time, she wasn't alone. She had 2 other board members with her, a grim-faced man named Stan, and a woman who looked like a slightly older, more disappointed version of Carol. The beige trinity. Mr. Miller, Carol said, her voice dangerously calm. Another exhibition? Asset liquidation, Carol. I corrected her smoothly. Completely different legal and philosophical framework. She handed me another cream-colored envelope. I didn't even have to open it. I could feel the smugness radiating through the paper. The fine for a second violation is $250, and Stan is documenting this for the board. Stan, on cue, took a picture of my liquidation event with his phone. They stood there, a silent wall of suburban judgment, until my one potential customer, a woman looking at an old lamp, felt awkward and left. Defeated, I began to pack my things. The war of semantics was lost. That evening, I sat on the pickle bucket in my garage, surrounded by the assets I had failed to liquidate. The glorious dream of commerce was dead, buried under a pile of laminated notices and HOA-approved taupe. Linda brought me a beer. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. Her gentle, pitying sigh said it all. I was just a guy in a garage full of junk again. The king had been deposed. Defeat is a quiet, creeping thing. For 2 days, I moped. I watched an entire season of a show about people who flip houses. I ate cereal for dinner. The garage door remained closed, a monument to my failed revolution. The cream-colored notice from Carol was on the kitchen counter, its presence a constant, nagging reminder of my humiliation. Linda treated me with the gentle caution one reserves for a sick pet. It was, without a doubt, my darkest hour. The epiphany, when it came, didn't arrive in a flash of lightning. It arrived at 2:17 a.m., fueled by a potent combination of insomnia, cheap instant coffee, and the boundless rabbit hole of the internet. Unable to sleep, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen painting my face in a ghostly blue light. I had started by Googling how to fight an HOA, and had descended into a bizarre labyrinth of legal forums, municipal code databases, and angry blog posts from disgruntled homeowners across America. I was deep into the city of Northwood's public records, looking at zoning ordinances, not because I had a plan, but because I was too tired and caffeinated to stop clicking. And then I saw it. A sentence buried in a PDF file about residential zoning, so beautiful it almost made me weep. It was a clause detailing the allowances for home-based businesses. My heart started to pound. I kept reading. An HOA has jurisdiction over the residential use of a property. Its rules, its covenants, its tyrannical edicts about gnome height and mailbox neutrality, they were all based on the assumption that the homes were, well, homes. But what if a small part of my property wasn't strictly residential anymore? What if, legally speaking, my garage ceased to be a place where a minivan and a broken lawnmower went to die, and instead became a place of business? A manic grin spread across my face. The plan that bloomed in my mind was so simple, so elegant, so utterly, beautifully petty. It was a masterstroke of malicious compliance. The next morning, I ambushed Linda while she was making her morning tea. I had been up all night, and my energy was a dangerous cocktail of sleep deprivation and pure adrenaline. I had my laptop open on the counter. "Honey," I began, my voice trembling with suppressed excitement. "I have something to show you." She eyed me warily. "Frank, if this is another one of your get-rich-quick schemes involving crypto or artisanal dog treats, I swear—" "Better," I declared, spinning the laptop around to show her the PowerPoint presentation I had created at 3 a.m. The title slide, complete with a star wipe transition effect, read, "Project Freedom." Linda squinted at the screen. "Freedom? What's it stand for?" I cleared my throat and read from my notes. Frank's Retail Emporium and Enterprise of Domestic Objects and Merchandise. She stared at me, her face a perfect blank. "You're not serious." "Oh, I am deadly serious," I said, clicking to the next slide, which featured a blurry photo of our garage and a lot of arrows. Here's the beauty of it. I'm not going to be having any more yard sales. A look of profound relief washed over her face. Oh, thank God, Frank. I'm so glad you've come to your senses. No, you misunderstand, I said, holding up a finger. I'm going to be opening a permanent, licensed, and registered small business in our garage. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Linda just looked at me, then at the laptop, then back at me. Frank, she said slowly, as if speaking to a child or a golden retriever. The minivan lives in the garage. The minivan can live in the driveway, I countered, my voice rising with passion. It needs to see the world. It needs a tan. Think of the principle of the thing, Linda. The HOA can regulate residential activity, but they have to yield to municipal and state business law. It's a loophole, a glorious, beautiful loophole, and I'm going to drive a cargo van right through it. So your grand plan to get back at Carol is to turn our home into a strip mall? Not a strip mall, I corrected her. A boutique, a very, very rustic boutique. A shabby chic emporium. It's very trendy. She put her head in her hands and sighed, a long, weary sound that spoke of years of putting up with my schemes. Just tell me one thing. Will this get us more fines? Legally, I said, puffing out my chest. They can't touch me. It took the rest of the morning, but I convinced her. Or, more accurately, I wore her down. My manic energy was too powerful to resist. And so, with her deeply skeptical blessing, I set my plan in motion. I navigated the labyrinthine city website, filled out the online forms for a sole proprietorship and a home-based business license. I described the nature of my business as retail sales of second-hand goods and antiques. It sounded so much better than selling my old junk. I paid the $75 registration fee with my credit card. It was the most satisfying purchase I'd made in years. 24 hours later, an official email arrived. Attached was a PDF of my business license. Frank's Flea Market and Curio Cabinet, LLC. I printed it out on our fanciest photo paper and then drove to a craft store to buy a gaudy, gold-colored frame. I hung it on the wall in the garage. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. But a business license alone wasn't enough. I needed legitimacy. I needed infrastructure. I needed shelves. I found a local contractor in the phone book named Gus. His ad was simple. Gus's Contracting. We build stuff. We fix stuff. Call Gus. No frills. I liked that. Gus showed up the next day. He was a large, burly man with a magnificent beard and a stoic expression that suggested he'd seen it all. He walked into my garage, looked around at the piles of my inventory, and then looked at me. "Gus, my man, welcome," I said, shaking his calloused hand. "I need you to transform this temple of domesticity into a cathedral of commerce. I'm thinking industrial chic shelving, you know? Something rugged but approachable. Maybe some track lighting to really accentuate the beautiful patina on my collection of old hubcaps." Gus grunted. He kicked the Nordic track with the toe of his steel-toed boot. "You want shelves?" "Shelves that whisper, 'Your disposable income is welcome here,'" I clarified. "Shelves that scream, 'I am a legitimate place of business and not just some guy's garage.'" Gus stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. Sure. Right, shelves, and maybe a sign. I'll email you a quote." The quote was reasonable. The shelves arrived a week later, flat-packed. True to his ad, Gus built the stuff. He and his assistant erected a series of sturdy, no-nonsense wooden shelves along 2 walls of the garage in about 4 hours, working with a silent efficiency that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. Now for the final phase of the transformation. I enlisted Dave. We spent an entire weekend fueled by cheap beer and a shared sense of righteous purpose. We hauled the minivan out of the garage and parked it on the street. Linda looked at it sitting there, exposed and vulnerable, with a look of deep betrayal. We moved every box, every tool, every piece of forgotten junk. We sorted, we priced, we arranged my wares on the new shelves. The Nordic track went in the back corner, rebranded as a manager's special. The box of miscellaneous cords was artfully draped over a hook with a sign that read, "Cables of Mystery, $1 each." We turned my old workbench into a checkout counter, complete with a cash box and a credit card reader I'd ordered online. The final touch was the sign Gus had made. It was a simple, professionally routed piece of wood that read, "Frank's Flea Market and Curio Cabinet." Underneath, in smaller letters, Est 2025. Dave and I hoisted it up and screwed it into the frame above the garage door. We stood back on the driveway, admiring our work. The garage no longer looked like a place of suburban despair. It looked like a store. A weird, cluttered, slightly unhinged store, but a store nonetheless. "It's beautiful," Dave said, a tear in his eye. "It's more than beautiful, my friend," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's legal." The grand opening of Frank's Flea Market and Curio Cabinet was scheduled for the following Saturday. My marketing budget was exactly $0, so I relied on guerrilla tactics. Dave and I designed a flyer on my computer using a dizzying array of fonts and some questionable clip art of a smiling treasure chest. It promised unbelievable deals, once-in-a-lifetime finds, and free coffee while it lasts. In the dead of night, we stuffed one into every neighbor's mailbox, a flagrant violation of both federal law and HOA bylaw 22. But I was a businessman now. I was a scofflaw. I was playing by a new set of rules. Saturday morning arrived, bright and clear. I rolled up the garage door with the flair of a Broadway director raising the curtain on opening night. The track lighting Gus had installed cast a warm, inviting glow on the shelves of neatly arranged junk. The Haggler's Delight playlist was piping softly from a Bluetooth speaker. A fresh pot of coffee was brewing. I was open for business. For the first hour, nothing happened. I stood behind my workbench-turned checkout counter, nervously rearranging a display of porcelain thimbles. I started to think this was a terrible, expensive mistake. Linda poked her head out from the kitchen door. "Any customers?" she whispered. "They're just waiting for the opportune moment to strike," I whispered back, trying to sound confident. Then a car slowed down. An elderly couple, the type who looked like professional yard sale hunters, parked across the street and ambled over. The woman picked up Norman the garden gnome. "How much for this little fella?" she asked. "For you? $2, I said smoothly. She handed me 2 crumpled bills. My first sale. The feeling was electric. After that, a slow but steady trickle of people began to arrive. It was a bizarre and wonderful cross-section of humanity. There was a young woman in a band t-shirt who bought a stack of my old vinyl records, a stern-looking man who spent 20 minutes examining a rusty handsaw before offering me half the asking price. I accepted. And a chatty neighbor named Barb who bought a chipped teacup and then told me all about her daughter's recent divorce. A couple of teenagers came by and bought an old hang-in-there baby cat poster, presumably for ironic purposes. It wasn't a gold rush, but it was working. The cash box was starting to fill up. I was making sales, talking to people, feeling useful. I was a shopkeeper, a purveyor of previously loved goods. And then I saw it. The silver Lexus. It came down the street not with a roar, but with a silent, ominous hum, and parked directly in front of my house. Carol Perkins emerged from the driver's side. She was wearing a different beige pantsuit, but the expression of distilled fury was the same. She was holding her clipboard like a weapon. "Showtime," I muttered to myself. She marched up my driveway, her sensible heels clicking on the asphalt. Her eyes swept over the customers, the shelves, the hand-painted sign above the door. Her lip curled in a sneer. "What?" she began, her voice low and trembling with rage. "Is the meaning of this?" I gave her my best customer service smile. "Carol, welcome to Frank's Flea Market and Curio Cabinet, LLC. So glad you could make it for our grand opening. Can I interest you in this fondue set? Barely used. It's Swiss." "Don't you Carol me, Frank Miller," she hissed. "This is the most flagrant, the most obscene violation of community covenants I have ever witnessed in my 7 years as president." "Violation?" I said, feigning innocence. "I'm not sure what you mean. This isn't a yard sale. This is my registered and licensed place of business." I casually reached over and tapped the gaudy gold frame hanging on the wall beside me. "See? State and city approved." Carol's eyes darted to the framed business license. She stared at it. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a full 5 seconds, the queen of bylaws was speechless. It was the most satisfying silence I had ever experienced. This is a residential zone," she finally sputtered, finding her voice. "You can't just open a shop in your garage." "Well, Carol, according to City of Northwood Ordinance 113.8, subsection D, I said, reciting the line I had practiced in the mirror all week, home-based businesses of a retail nature are permitted as long as they do not constitute a public nuisance, generate excessive traffic, or alter the residential character of the building. I gestured around me. As you can see, the character of my building is still decidedly residential. The traffic is, shall we say, modest, and my customers are quite pleasant. Barb here was just telling me about her gardenias. Barb, who had been examining a collection of salt and pepper shakers, gave a little wave. Carol's face was turning a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her beige suit. She whipped out her phone. "We'll see about that. I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said calmly. "I'm sure they'd be interested to see a new local business contributing to the city's tax base." 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out. One was young, with a fresh crew cut and an earnest, by-the-book expression. The other was older, with a weary mustache and the profoundly tired eyes of a man who had seen every form of human foolishness and was no longer surprised by any of it. They were, according to their name tags, Officer O'Connell and Officer Ramirez. Carol immediately descended upon them. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man," she pointed a trembling finger at me, "is running an illegal bazaar from his garage. It's a clear violation." Officer Ramirez ambled over to me, his gaze slowly taking in the scene. He looked at the shelves of junk, at the coffee pot, at the framed license on the wall. A corner of his mustache twitched. "Sir," he said, his voice a gravelly monotone, "do you have a business license for this bazaar?" "I certainly do, officer," I said proudly, pointing to the frame. "State and city registered, fully compliant. Would you like a receipt for your time? I have a receipt book." O'Connell, the rookie, was dutifully examining the license. He turned to Carol. "Ma'am, his paperwork looks legitimate. I'm not sure this is a police matter. It seems like a civil issue between you and him, regarding your HOA rules." Carol was aghast. "A civil issue? He has turned his house into a flea market. Look at the traffic!" she shrieked, gesturing at the elderly couple who were now getting back into their car. Officer Ramirez let out a long, slow sigh. He leaned in towards O'Connell, but spoke just loud enough for all of us to hear. "Just let it go, kid. You want to spend your Tuesday afternoon writing up a report about a dispute over a ceramic cat? We've got real work to do." He turned back to me. "Sir, as long as you're not selling anything illegal, blocking the sidewalk, or causing a riot, you're not breaking any laws that I'm here to enforce. Have a nice day." He tipped his cap, and the two officers got back in their cruiser and drove away. It was a total, crushing, glorious victory. Carol stood on my driveway, defeated and exposed. The customers were all staring at her. Her face, which had been crimson, was now pale with humiliation. Without another word, she spun on her heel, got back into her Lexus, and sped away. I stood in the doorway of my garage, the proprietor of my own domain. The king had not just been restored to his throne, he had built a bigger, better throne out of old 2x4s and sheer, unadulterated spite. I let out a triumphant laugh. Frank's flea market was here to stay. I had won the battle, but I soon learned that Carol Perkins was a master of guerrilla warfare. If she couldn't shut me down with a direct assault, she would try to bleed me dry through 1,000 tiny cuts. The HOA, under her vengeful command, launched a campaign of petty harassment so intense, so meticulously documented, it was almost impressive. The first notice appeared a few days after the grand opening. It was another cream-colored envelope, this time left in our mailbox. It was a $50 fine for improper long-term vehicle storage. My minivan, which was parked perfectly legally on the street in front of my own house, had apparently violated a bylaw stating that vehicles could not remain in the same spot on a community street for more than 24 consecutive hours. "Are you kidding me?" I fumed, waving the paper at Linda. "She's ticketing the company car." "It's not a company car, Frank. It's the car I use to get groceries," she reminded me. "The one that smells like old soccer cleats." "Details, details. This is harassment." Dave's solution was, as always, both simple and absurd. "Dude, you just gotta move it. Every day, make it a ritual." And so it began. Every evening around 7 p.m., I would go out, start the minivan, and move it exactly 6 feet forward or 6 feet backward. Sometimes, if I was feeling particularly feisty, I'd move it across the street. I started leaving a note on the dashboard for Carol, who I was sure was watching from her window. "Just stretching my legs. Be back soon. The minivan." The next fine was for the sign. My beautiful custom-made wooden sign was, according to Bylaw 15, unapproved exterior signage exceeding 6 square inches. The fine was $75. "She's attacking my brand identity," I lamented to Dave over beers in the garage. "So go smaller," he suggested, his eyes twinkling. "Go plural." The next day, I took down the main sign. In its place, I carefully taped up a constellation of over 100 tiny, handwritten signs all over the garage door. Each one was smaller than a business card. One had the letter F, the next R, the next A, and so on. From a distance, it spelled out Frank's Flea Market. Up close, it was just an insane collage of tiny pieces of paper. Technically, no single sign violated the bylaw. When Carol drove by later that day, the squeal of her Lexus's tires as she slowed down was music to my ears. The war escalated. I got a notice for improper vehicle positioning, citing a customer whose left front tire was, and I quote, making contact with the rolled curb of the driveway apron. The fine was accompanied by a blurry, zoomed-in photograph as evidence. This called for more elaborate countermeasures. The following weekend, Dave showed up wearing a ridiculous, slightly too small tuxedo jacket he'd bought at a thrift store and a dusty top hat. We found an old orange safety vest and created a sign that read, "Complimentary valet parking." Whenever a customer would pull up, Dave would jog out to their car with a flourish. "Welcome to Frank's," he'd announce. Allow me to position your vehicle in a manner that is fully compliant with Northwood Estates HOA regulations. He would then guide them into a parking spot on my driveway with a series of elaborate, theatrical hand signals, ensuring their tires were at least 2 inches from any curb. Most customers were bewildered, but one lady gave him a $5 tip. The pettiness went both ways. I received a violation for an oil stain on the driveway, which they designated a chemical hazard in a commercial zone. The next day, I bought a bag of children's sidewalk chalk and, around the oil stain, drew an elaborate crime scene-style chalk outline. Inside it, I wrote, "A great deal was murdered here." The cul-de-sac was no longer a quiet suburban street. It was a Cold War battlefield. The neighborhood quickly divided into factions. Team Carroll consisted of the older, more established residents who muttered about property values and glared at my customers. They would ostentatiously water their lawns whenever a car parked near their house. Stan, Carroll's board member crony, took to slowly driving by my house every hour on the hour, taking notes on his own little clipboard. But then there was Team Frank. These were the younger families, the renters, and anyone who had ever been on the receiving end of a notice from Carroll about the shade of their window shutters or the unauthorized cheerfulness of their welcome mat. They became my silent, and sometimes not so silent, allies. Mr. Henderson from across the street started forgetting to move his garbage cans from the curb until Saturday afternoon, effectively blocking the prime parking spot in front of his house so my customers could use it. A young woman named Chloe, who I'd once gotten a fine for because her wind chimes were deemed sonically intrusive, started a neighborhood Facebook group titled, "I Support Frank's Flea Market." It got 50 members in 2 days. Support came in small gestures. Someone would drop off a box of donuts at the checkout counter. Another would bring me a box of their own junk to sell on consignment. My favorite was old Mr. Gable from the end of the street. He was a quiet man who I'd barely spoken to in 5 years. One afternoon, he shuffled up the driveway, pressed a folded $20 bill into my hand, and whispered, "Give her hell, son," before shuffling away. Linda, who had started this whole thing by suggesting I declutter, had transformed from a skeptical observer into a reluctant co-conspirator. She wouldn't work the counter, but she started making lists of things we could sell. She'd point at an old vase and say, "That thing has to be worth at least $10. One afternoon, I came back into the garage to find her dusting off an old set of encyclopedias. "Just making sure the inventory is presentable," she said, refusing to meet my eye. But I saw the small smile on her face. The war of attrition was exhausting, ridiculous, and incredibly stressful. Every new envelope in the mailbox sent a jolt of anxiety through me. The fines were piling up, though I had no intention of ever paying them. But with every petty attack, my resolve hardened. This was bigger than my garage now. It was a fight for the soul of the cul-de-sac. It was for Mr. Gable, for Chloe's wind chimes, for Dave's non-regulation basketball net. Carol Perkins may have had the bylaws on her side, but I had the people, and a very enthusiastic, top-hat-wearing valet. Carol was losing the war of attrition. My ridiculous countermeasures and the growing support from the neighborhood had turned her campaign of harassment into a public spectacle, and she was the one who looked foolish. I knew a woman like her wouldn't just concede defeat. She would escalate. She would go for the nuclear option. The official notice for an emergency HOA board meeting was posted on the community bulletin board. The agenda had only one item: discussion and vote on proposed bylaw amendment 27B. I didn't need to read the fine print to know what it was. A member of Frank's militia on Facebook snapped a picture of the proposal and posted it immediately. It was being called the Perkins Proviso. The language was dry and bureaucratic, but its purpose was as clear as a freshly Windexed window. The amendment sought to ban any and all home-based businesses that involved regular customer foot traffic, vehicular congregation, or the on-premise exchange of physical goods. It was a legal sniper rifle aimed directly at the heart of Frank's flea market. If it passed, my business license wouldn't matter. The HOA would have a brand new ironclad rule to shut me down for good. "This is it," I told Linda, showing her the photo on my phone. "The final showdown." "So, what are you going to do?" she asked. She had that worried look on her face again, the one that made me feel both guilty and determined. "What am I going to do?" I repeated, a fire igniting in my belly. "I'm going to go to that meeting, and I'm going to fight." The night of the meeting, I was a nervous wreck. I paced the living room, rehearsing my speech. I knew I couldn't go in there ranting like a madman. I needed to be calm, rational, and persuasive. I needed to be a man of the people. Linda acted as my speechwriter and editor. "No, Frank, you can't start by calling Carol a beige-suited warlord," she advised gently, red pen in hand. "Maybe try esteemed board president. But she is a beige-suited warlord. Humor them. Be the bigger man." Dave, on the other hand, had different advice. "You should ride in on a Razor scooter," he said, popping by for moral support. "And when you get to the podium, you throw down a smoke bomb and shout, 'Let my people sell.' I appreciate the theatricality, Dave, but I think I'll stick to the speech." The community center rec room was packed. I had expected a dozen or so of the usual HOA meeting attendees, but it seemed half the neighborhood had turned out. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Team Carol was clustered on one side of the room, a sea of pastel sweaters and disapproving frowns. Team Frank, a more motley crew in jeans and hoodies, was on the other. Dave gave me a thumbs up from the back row. Linda squeezed my hand. The meeting began. Carol, standing at a flimsy podium, delivered a prim and proper speech about the importance of preserving the residential character of our community. She spoke of unvetted strangers and declining property values. She made it sound like my little flea market was a gateway to total societal collapse. Then, it was my turn. The floor was open for public comment. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the podium. I unfolded my speech, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I took a deep breath, looked out at the faces in the crowd, and began. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Miller, and I live at 24 Blossom Court. Many of you know me as the guy with the garage sale that got a little out of hand." A few chuckles rippled through my side of the room. I felt myself relax a little. "I'm here to talk about Amendment 27B, and I understand the concerns. I do. Nobody wants our neighborhood to turn into a commercial free-for-all. But my little shop isn't a threat to property values. It's a place where neighbors can find a bargain, have a chat, and maybe buy a garden gnome that is, I admit, slightly taller than the 12 inches mandated by Bylaw 19. More laughter. I saw a few people on Carol's side crack a smile. I had them. "This isn't about my flea market," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "This is about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to be a community that's governed by a 300-page book of rules that dictates the color of our trash cans and the height of our gnomes? Or do we want to be a community of neighbors? I know for a fact that Mr. Henderson got a notice last year because his holiday lights were still up on January 2nd. And Chloe over there was told her wind chimes were too loud. We've all had run-ins with this kind of overzealous enforcement." I looked directly at Carol, who was staring daggers at me. A neighborhood isn't about perfect lawns and uniform mailboxes. It's about people. It's about having the freedom to live your life and, yes, maybe even sell your old blender without getting a legal notice taped to your door. Defeating this amendment isn't a vote for chaos. It's a vote for common sense. It's a vote for being neighbors again. I folded up my paper and walked back to my seat. The room was quiet for a moment, and then my side erupted in applause. Carol, looking flustered, called for the vote. "All in favor of adopting Amendment 27B, please raise your hands." Her hand shot up, along with Stan's and a dozen others from her side of the room. My heart sank. "All opposed?" And then a beautiful thing happened. My hand went up. Linda's went up. Dave's went up. And then one by one, hands went up all over the room. Mr. Henderson, Chloe, Mr. Gable. People I didn't even know. There were far more hands raised against the amendment than for it. The motion was defeated. A cheer went up from our side. Dave was whistling. I grabbed Linda and hugged her. Across the room I saw Carol Perkins's face. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She had lost. Her ultimate weapon had misfired. She quietly gathered her papers from the podium and, without another word, walked out of the room. The beige-suited warlord had been vanquished. The aftermath of the Battle of the Board meeting was swift and decisive. The war was over, and the treaty was written in the language of neighborhood gossip. Carol Perkins, stripped of her authority and publicly defeated, became a ghost in her own kingdom. Her daily patrols ceased. The flow of cream-colored envelopes dried up. 2 weeks later, a "For Sale" sign was hammered into her perfect, HOA-compliant lawn. It was the most beautiful lawn ornament I had ever seen. Without its iron-fisted ruler, the HOA board eased up, returning to its intended function of arguing about the budget for the community pool and sending gentle reminders about landscaping. The reign of terror was over. And Frank's flea market and curio cabinet? It thrived. Not in a quit your day job and buy a yacht sort of way. I did eventually take a part-time consulting gig to keep the mortgage paid and Linda happy. But the flea market became my weekend passion. It didn't make me rich, but it paid for groceries, a few date nights, and a steady supply of beer for me and Dave. More importantly, it changed the rhythm of the cul-de-sac. The garage door, once a barrier, was now an open invitation. Neighbors I'd only ever waved to before would now stop by to browse, bringing their own items to sell or just to chat while they sipped the free and slightly improved coffee. It became a quirky, beloved neighborhood institution, a place where you could buy a mismatched saucer for a quarter and get some free, unsolicited advice on how to deal with crabgrass. I sit here now, on my trusty pickle bucket, on a sunny Saturday morning. Norman the garden gnome is gone, sold to a happy home, but he's been replaced by a ceramic squirrel with a banjo. A young couple is haggling with me over the price of a vintage lava lamp. Dave is working security, which mostly involves him sitting in a lawn chair and critiquing my sales techniques. The minivan is parked peacefully in the driveway, its days as a pawn in a suburban Cold War behind it. Linda comes out with 2 cups of coffee, handing one to me. She shakes her head, a small, fond smile playing on her lips as she watches me sell the lava lamp for $5 less than I wanted. So yeah, I turned my garage into a flea market. Was it worth it? The fines, the arguments, the time I nearly superglued my hand to a lawn flamingo while making a repair? Absolutely. Because in the heart of the beige cookie-cutter suburbs, where conformity is king, I staked my claim. I fought for my right to be a little weird, to turn my junk into a joy. A man's garage is his castle, they say. And my castle just happens to have a fantastic collection of vintage National Geographics for $1 apiece. Come on by sometime. I'll give you a good deal.